The day of Osiris' death may be the date of the flood, the date of the deluge. We are talking essentially about a cataclysm by water, because the word deluge and the word cataclysm is the same cataclysms in Greek. It did not necessarily have to be an endless rain. It could be, for example, the impact of a celestial body on the water, on the sea, which generated a real cataclysm. Not only this island of the Origins, but also other places at the bottom of the sea. This island of the Origins is called the Land of the Primitives by Raymond. And he has no doubt in his interpretation of the texts of Fu that this land of the primitives ended up in darkness and under the clouds.
Hey, how about, and we are in Rediscovering Our Origins, we are already underway. Chapter 9, a chapter that is going to be, I tell you, a very important chapter that tells us about enigma of the stellar channels, a chapter. I hope you have had a good breakfast, or in the time slot you are in, you are well prepared mentally. But first I want to tell you that, as we are always trying, this book is the book that you can buy whenever you want. You have it in the description of the video there. You have the link, because I say it, because we are going to use it as a guide, as we have been doing in the description of the video. There you have the link, because we are going to use as a guide, as we have been doing throughout all the chapters, to explain what we want to explain. But in the book you have all the scientific processes that have been developed to reach the conclusions that we have reached. Or rather, we are going to explain in this program a program that, as I say, has a lot of importance for what we are explaining in this program, that, as I say, has a lot of importance for what we are explaining in this program. Very important for what we are explaining. Well, Miquel is going to explain it to you. How are you? Very well, thank you, very well.
Good morning.
Well, you were telling me about the importance of this chapter, how important it is for everything we are explaining. Yes.
Yes.
Because it is so important.
Let's talk about the enigma of the stellar channels. The enigma of the stellar channels is something that has been raised for a long time by Egyptologists who have studied the Great Pyramid. That is, they are perfectly cut channels oriented north and south, in such a way that, according to so far established, they pointed to certain stars, to the alignments of certain stars. They are perfectly embedded in the stonework of the monument, framed with stone blocks, and are approximately 20 centimeters in ideal width. These channels, with their alignments, are going to give us something very spectacular, which is time. Not only the time of construction of the Great Pyramid, which we'll see, that is the initial date and the final date of the construction of the Great Pyramid, but from there they will give us something that's going to give us something much more disturbing, which we're going to see throughout this episode.
Let's see if I understand. You're telling me that the stellar canals, that there has always been, recently there have been attempts to, one has put in probes, has not put in robots to advance. There have been 2 robots in
the U-port of Gantenbrink is one of
the 94, I think it was something like that, in the mid-90s that came across that first. It was the first slab that covered them when you handled them, and then the next attempt, which was not so long ago.
They perforated the slab, put an optical camera, and they saw that there was another one. But the important thing in this case, which I'm not saying it's not, watch out, what is behind the second slab, there may be a third, etc. But above all, what is important, or what I have found to be more exact, is what they were for, what they were used for. What they were used for is what they were for, where they were aimed at and for what purpose. And we are going to see that today. But before this, we will have to talk about the myth of Osiris and the Great Cataclysm. And the Great Cataclysm. Let's see. Osiris. Osiris was a god of the dead in ancient Egypt. It turns out, according to Plutarch, it gives us the exact date of the death of Osiris. The 17th of the month of Atir, which is the 3rd month of the Egyptian year, when the sun was in the constellation of Scorpion, and when the moon was quite defeated.
That is to say, Plutarch says it in a serious way, not in a mythological way, and he does not say it nowadays in or...
No, there is
a date, no.
Let's see, Plutarch was high priest of Delphi. Therefore, it was assumed that he could have a lot of information about what had happened in antiquity. I mean, we're not talking about just any character. Is that correct? Now, the data that Plutarch gives are the data of total reliability, as I have been able to verify. Because from there, I wondered what that date could be. And it turns out that what I find is that when in my astronomical program I cross these three data, I get a series of dates. And these dates are referenced to a calendar called Julian Day, which was published in the 16th century. But the data that I have found explains to me that it is a very old calendar. That calendar, called Julian Day, begins on the first day of January of the year less, of the year minus 4712. And it is an astronomical calendar that is being used by astronomers today for dating the days of our life, of the year of the passage of time. So, in the Julian Day calendar, there is a date that fulfills exactly these data that Plutarch gives us. And that is the number 432,001. And so what they are telling us is we have seen the importance of the number 432 along the Great Pyramid, but then there's something else going on. Veroso, a historian, Mavillonian, explains to us that the time from the creation to the flood is 430, is 432,000 years. Therefore, the question we have to ask ourselves reasonably from all this series of coincidences would be that the 432,000 would be the Julian Day before the flood. Would be that the 432,000 would be the Julian Day prior to the death of Osiris. But of course, what relation can the death of Osiris have with the deluge? With the deluge of which Veroso speaks to us? Well, later analyses of the Osiris myth give us the answer.
But if I'm going to understand it well, what it wants to suggest, or what it seems that all this information suggests us, is that the myth of Osiris introduced as mythology could hide a history that is certainly real, but not that it has been happening in the past. Certainly not real, that has been passing from generation to generation through the myth.
That is to say, we know that the myths have also a function of collecting the proto-history through them. And in this case, it is very clear. Let's see. If Osiris is a god who dies, drowned, and who afterwards is dismembered by his brother Set. That is to say, let's go a little bit into the myth, Set. That is, Osiris is the king of Egypt, Pharaoh of Egypt. Egypt, his brother Set, is jealous of him. Envy. It is the Egyptian myth of the biblical Cain and Abel, but transformed into a monarchy. And from there, prepares a trap for him. It is seen that Osiris had a measure quite superior to the normal one. So he prepares a sarcophagus, a box, which would end up being a sarcophagus. A box with gold and precious stones, marvelous. And the court proposes that the different nobles, and that he will give it as a gift to the one who has exactly his measurements. All of them are introduced. None of them fulfills the measures until it is Osiris's turn. When Osiris is inside the marvelous box, he, Set, plus I think it's 70-something rebels. I don't know if it's 71 or 72. They close the chest, and they take it to the Nile. They throw it to the Nile. Therefore, Osiris dies drowned. From this, the waters of the Nile drag him to the delta. He comes out through the Tanitic mouth into the sea, and the waters carry him to Lebanon. There Isis goes to look for him and returns him to Egypt. But as Seth saw that he had not completely finished his work, what he does is the corpse and cut it into 14 parts, throws them into the waters of the Nile. And Isis manages to recover 13 of those parts. The 14th, the phallus, is eaten by a fish called Oxyrhynchus, and from then on it is totally condemned by the Egyptians. Of course, what does Isis do? He joins the 13 parts. And I explained it in a previous video. Replaces the penis with a reed, and from the unimaginable copulation becomes pregnant with her son Horus, from whom all the pharaohs of Egypt later claimed descent. Egypt. Let's take a look at the myth. Let us imagine a people that suffers a great destruction. Let us imagine that this great destruction results in a diaspora. Let us imagine that would be the parts of this great destruction. Let us imagine that at the moment when Isis, who would be the symbol of Egypt, unites this diaspora, from there she founds the pharaoh state. And the proof is that the son of Isis and Osiris, who would be the son of a foreign god, and of Isis, who would represent the land of Egypt, from there comes the son, who would be the ancestor and from whom all the pharaohs of Egypt would claim descent for 3 millennia. Millennia. Therefore, this, plus the formula of the flood, takes us back. And to see if it is possible that in the Egyptian mythology this is included in some.
I ask you, that is your interpretation that you make with the data that you have with with, let's say, with all the perspective that the research has given you? There is some other author, there are more authors that also see it in the same way.
Yes, Professor Raymond from the University of Manchester studies the texts of the construction of the Temple of Fu. And there he clearly describes that the wisdom of ancient Egypt, it comes from the survivors of a great cataclysm, by flood, by water, who end up at the bottom of the sea. And only 7 wise men are saved, and these 7 wise men are the ones who bring wisdom to Egypt. Wisdom to Egypt.
It is curious that in many mythologies the same number of wise men appears repeated. There are no...
Yes, in Mesopotamia too. Note that we are talking about that the Julian day of the construction of the pyramids is the 3rd of October. Is the 3rd of October of minus 3,530. We are talking about 1,000 years before the time of the construction of the pyramids. Why? From all that we have been commenting, it is deduced, in the book it is perfectly detailed, and that the day of the death of Osiris could be the date of the flood, that mythical flood. And there we have to be able to understand that. When we talk about deluge, we are essentially talking about a cataclysm by water, because the word deluge and the word cataclysm are the same. It's the same cataclysms in Greek. Therefore, it did not necessarily have to be a water cataclysm. It didn't necessarily have to be an endless rain. It could be, for example, the impact of a celestial body on the water, for example. On the water, on the sea, which would generate a real cataclysm that would carry away not only this island of the Origins, but also other places at the bottom of the sea. This island of Origins is called the Land of the Primitive by Raymond, and he has no doubt in his interpretation of the texts of Fu that this land of the primitives ended up in darkness and under the waters. Plutarch gives us the enormous service of giving us this date, and this date will be definitive, decisive to understand what the Great Pyramid represents. For the moment, let us memorize it. October, the 3rd of October of minus 3,530. Julian day, 432,000. 1.
An exact date?
Yes.
This also gave me goosebumps because it's like...
Look at it.
It is concrete, is to materialize a lot, is more...
Look at it. Realize. Notice that in the joint probability that the Julian day 432,001 was the 3rd of October, that is to say the 17th of the year, because the 3rd of October in the Julian calendar, not to be confused with the Julian day, the Julian calendar, the historical one of 365.25 days per year, which in turn comes from the ancient Egyptian official calendar, and which was introduced by Julius Caesar. That is why it is called Julian in this case. Well, it turns out that on the 17th of Attire, when the moon is quite defeated, the sun is in Scorpio. And it is that date that I have commented, the coincidence of these three data in a figure is of a probability of 312,075. That is to say, it is as if out of 100 million you had 30,075. If out of 100 million you had 32 probabilities. Therefore, only by the calculation of probabilities we are already insisting that this date, not only by the calculation of probabilities, the calculation of probabilities confirms that this date is an absolutely decisive date in history, that is to say in our proto-history, and that probably, in this case, not probably, I am sure, that what he is doing is confirming the date of that cataclysm, which is known as the diluto. And one piece of evidence that I think we need to take into account is that both the Julian calendar reform, I say it wrong, both the Gregorian calendar reform, which took place in 1582, as well as the later Lutheran calendar reformation, takes as its basis one day before and one day after this date, the anniversary, the day before or the day after this anniversary. And this is absolutely connotative of the fact that in antiquity this date was known at least as early as, and this date was known at least by certain wise astronomers who could access this secret information, I would dare to say, of the past.
I see that you have it very clear. That is to say, I do not see any shadow of doubt in your look. I am absolutely convinced that there are many people who are going to be confronted with this alternative view of history. But my question is, why do you think that, as I imagine from what you explained, that the disaster was of such a magnitude that there were very few people left, that very few were left or were dispersed very much, the whole population that was in the world was very much diminished? It has to be something very traumatic for our memory to be so dented?
Yes.
It has to be something like that?
Indeed. And that would explain why later the wisdom that comes from that land of the primitive, that mother civilization, is encrypted in architecture. Because architecture resists, of course, but it lives, doesn't it? And it survives.
We have it, there it is, after 4,500 years.
Then notice that there are data that are also perfectly verifiable. The fact of 14 parts of the body of Osiris. And if there were 14 generations, and that would be 342 years. And it turns out that from that date, 3,530, to the date of 3,188, in which Sehul, minus 3,188, situates the beginning of the Egyptian monarchy, there is a time very similar to these characteristics.
And it is not more, and could also be the tribes that were in the villages, or the tribes that were in the area, and that are unified in a single reign?
Probably. But it is that the subject is of where it came from. The unifier came from. That is to say, Osiris is presented as a god who teaches them agriculture in the mythology itself.
Once again, the same myths are repeated, not the wise men who come from other places and who implant
there it is.
in knowledge to science and agriculture, which is a classic also, is not to say all the civilizing principles effectively are civilizing sages effectively, and that is repeated in many mythologies, but not only in Egypt nor in Mesopotamia, but also we go to the other side of the sea. If we cross the we find something similar, and we also find that Chakol, for example, there are always civilizing myths, there are always civilizing myths of God.
There are always civilizing myths of gods that come from outside. Another of the data that I believe that it is necessary to highlight is that we know that the total height of the Great Pyramid was 147.134. To be exact, 147.133, 5 meters, all right? It occurred to me to look, because it had always been said that it was the distance to the sun in the perigelion. It occurred to me to look at what distance the sun would be. The 3rd of October of minus 3,530. And I have to go back 2 days. to the 1st of October of minus 3,530, the Sun was exactly 147,133,510 kilometers. That is to say that it was 100 million times the height of the Great Pyramid. Therefore, the height of the Great Pyramid can contain the exact date with a difference of 2 days. And we ask ourselves, well, why those 2 days? What occurs to me is that that great cataclysm may have lasted 2 days, and that in fact Plato speaks in an instance, which we'll see the reference later, that depicts a terrible day and a night, taking an island to the bottom of the sea. And notice that we are talking about 2 days before the great cataclysm. Therefore, there are many elements that show us, confirm that the established theory, i.e., that the established theory, that is to say, that confirm the established theory, to put it more easily. That said, the elocation of the 342 years and the 14 generations that we discussed earlier, if we were to go from 3,530 years forward, in these 342 years, we would find ourselves, as I have said before, with the dating that Sewell gives to the unification of the Nile country under Minnesota. But notice the question is, who is Sewell? Sewell is an astronomer. I would dare to say is a specialist in calendars, would be an archaeoastronomer practically, who publishes a marvelous text, a wonderful text in a book published by the University of Cambridge, which will later help me to reconstruct the origin of the Egyptian calendar, combining the data that Sewell gives us with the data that Theon of Alexandria gives us. And this, in fact, is one of the elements of which I can be most satisfied, because it had always been sought. The initial date of the Egyptian calendar, precisely in order to be able to refer the Egyptian chronology to the Egyptian chronology to this original date, which has nothing to do with the initial date of the merger of Egypt, of the formation of Egypt. I will comment later.
Well, in fact, here you have the book, in case you are interested, if you want to buy it. And here it is very detailed, and you mark the chronology of the protohistory. And yes, of course, you have it well detailed.
The chronology of the protest is very detailed.
We are not going to entertain ourselves now, because otherwise it will allow us to explain more things that we are interested in. But, well, you have already advanced it before. I was going to tell you to document, hey, Miquel. Then we can say it, because the channels are included in the masonry, or not in the masonry, or in the masonry.
Yes, in the stone masonry of the pyramid originally.
That already indicates a planning that makes them look like clock hands, or like the hands of a clock or a stone mechanism.
Yes, I would say that I would associate it more with a telescope, of course, even if at the end they rotate. If in the straight section, that also has rectifications in the section, because it is seen that it was not easy for them to aim to know exactly how they were going. But well, if we look at the final stretch of the channels, which is the longest, it gives us data that confirms the theory that I have established until now.
No?
Now let's go for it. These gentlemen dare to point at a planet to fix exactly the start date and the end date of the works. Then the paradox occurs that logically, when they point at the initial date of the works are not started. But God has the architectural project done. The inclination of the star channel, of the south channel of the Queen's chamber, I was aligned on the 2nd of October of minus 2,530 with the most difficult planet to hunt, Mars. For Mars is a retrograde planet. That is, it moves forward in the sky, and during periods it moves backward. Well, they dare to hunt Mars. That alignment occurs. Attention, 1,000 years, a minus 1 day, after the death of Osiris. And why that day? because after finishing the works, the next day is the ceremonial day.
And where to set up the party?
The great inauguration party of the Great Pyramid. So what is the southern star channel of the Queen's Chamber telling us? Hey, look, we are commemorating the millennial of the destruction of the mother civilization as a great reconstruction, because what they do in this architecture is to concentrate the wisdom of the mother civilization.
Now that I have said it, it has also come to me like a flash to say, why? Because it's 1,000 years ago, the crash was so big for the planet, of course, that it takes 1,000 years to say now.
Now we are stable, right? We got that civilization back. It takes 14 generations to build the Egyptian monarchy. Which in a way would be the recovery of the state and the state of the land of the primitives. And later, when the state is already strong enough, there is a brain, which is probably that of Imhotep. That after building, say, the step pyramid and the funerary enclosure of Yosem in parallel, imagine, as we will see in Book 2, the overall Giza project, as the great inaugural project of the millennium, commemorating the millennium of the flood, or the millennium, if you will, of the great cataclysm, to be more precise, that represented the destruction of the land of the primitives.
You are saying that it is linked? There are projects that come linked at a great distance. It's like a kind of like, see if you can tell me better who is an architect, but it's like urbanism in a beastly way.
Yes, we are talking about funerary urbanism. But we'll see this funerary urbanism in Book 2. Dr. Zahi Hawass is right. When he says that there is a fourth pyramid, which is the son of Cheops, Yedefre, which is part of the same complex. And I will demonstrate that in the second book, because what connects the pyramids of Giza is an exceptional geometry formed by Pythagorean turns. What is a Pythagorean turn? It is a Pythagorean triangle, therefore a right triangle, in which the three measures are integers, which is not easy. That is, if we apply the Pythagorean theorem and take two numbers that represent the two legs, raise them to the square and make the square root, most of the time you will not get an integer number, whole number. In other words, Pythagorean triads are an absolute mathematical exception. Well then, that mathematical exception is the one that allows, surely to Imhotep, to design the plane of Giza, to design what I have called the plan of arrangement of Giza. And it does something much stronger. But it has to do with history. It refers to the pre-existing monument, which is the great lion, which comes to him deformed, with the head clearly deformed, which is what we know today as the Sphinx of Giza, which is a monument, I already anticipated it in his day, that we have to go back to the 8th millennium to find the astronomical date of its inauguration. Therefore, but they not only designed Giza, but through another great Pythagorean triangle, a Pythagorean triangle whose perimeter is more than 18 kilometers, because it turns out that the pyramid of Giza was built in the 8th millennium. That the pyramid of Yedefre, the son of Cheops, is 8 kilometers away. We continue with the stellar canals. Let's see, there is another stellar channel, which is the southern channel of the King's Chamber, which is aligned on September 26th, 2547, before the construction of the pyramid. It would have aligned, with the planet Mars. And there is a coincidence that is really interesting, which is that...
but of the south channel of the Queen's Chamber, not of the Chamber of the King's Chamber.
The previous one from the King's Chamber, from the Queen's Chamber, that is the one that gives the end date, is the one from the Queen's Chamber. The one that gives the initial date is the one from the King's Chamber.
Yes, it does.
So what happens? In the same way that the 1,000 years occur with the Egyptian calendar of 365.25 days, the astronomical calendar governed by Sirius, called the zodiac calendar. Why? because it took as a reference the Hellenistic departure of Sirius. That is the return of Sirius after 70 days of being obscured by the light of the sun. And it turns out that in 3,000 years, that date only changed by 2 days. Therefore, imagine the level of accuracy that had the calendar referred to the departure of Sirius. That is the one of 365.25 days, which is the one that marks exactly the 1,000 years. But as they play with several calendars to establish the date of the beginning of the works, then they take the solar calendar, which is a little smaller. It is 365.24, currently 2217, but in their time 365.24 days. What happens? That second alignment has a particularity, which is that it occurs 983 exact years in a solar calendar after the great destruction, after the great cataclysm. And you will ask me, and what is the 983? Well, it is the sum of the nominal and ordinal values of the name, which we will say in the next chapter, of the mother civilization. Now that is to say, he did not give a stitch without thread. So let's see.
The question, this is becoming clear to me, and it is the true principle that if everything is tied up, and well tied up, everything extraordinarily.
Everything extraordinarily. So, the other issue is, well, and let's see, these gentlemen, how many days did they take to build the Great Pyramid? And there jumps out one of the biggest surprises of the whole process. They spent 6,216 days. And you know what that is? 7 times 888 days.
Oh, this really seems to me to be a bit of a stretch to say that
what is it going to give?
Really going to say the period of the works based on our most sacred number.
Indeed. Wait, but it doesn't end there. Now we are going to add the initial day and the final day of the works. Therefore, it will go from of 6,216, the initial day would be, the initial ceremony, would be the one of the tightening of the rope, which was to fix the limits of the pyramid on the little dock. And the pharaoh would come, and he was the one who would perform that ceremony, with the technicians, logically. And then, if we add that day plus the day of the inauguration, we have not 6,216, but 6,218. Well, to add it all up is nothing more than 8.88 multiplied 4 times by itself. That is 8.88 to the 4th.
Up to now, Bell twice.
Campan grades tiling twice the 888. But well, until now it had been said that the construction of the Great Pyramid had lasted 23 years, because this is the time of duration of the filling of Jufu, of Cheops. But it turns out that no, that those 6,218 correspond to 17 years. Attention, the number of the day of the death of Osiris, 17 years, and how many days? No, that would be more than a year.
I already go with the 8-8 everywhere.
Well then, but put it another way.
But let's see in days. There are in days. Days. How much comes out, and there is
17 years and 8.88 days, please. Therefore, the duration of the works of the Great Pyramid is 6,216 days of construction, which is the distance between the 2 alignments of Mars with the star canals. And if we add, that's 7 times 888 days. And if we add the day of the tightening of the rope and the day of the inauguration, it is 6,218 days, which is 8.88 multiplied 4 times by itself. And that in total is a time of 6,218 days, as I said, which corresponds to 17 years, the number of Osiris, the day of the death of Osiris, plus 8.88 days. So, of course, it is absolutely amazing. It is absolutely amazing.
Well, he must have been the foreman of the construction site. It must have been hell, because he must have been looking at the name of the building. No.
No, we know that from the graffiti on the stone blocks above the king's chamber. they must have been 3 years in advance. That is to say, they had time. That is to say, the date they had to meet was so important that they were well ahead of schedule. Which is not to say that, as happened, for example, with the Washington Monument in the capital city, they were well ahead of schedule. The Washington Monument in the federal capital of the United States, that after having finished the construction, they spent some time waiting for a key inauguration date. Key inauguration date?
Otherwise, I can imagine the man who was directing the time saying, "Come on, hurry up, we are not there yet."
Well, that happens in all public works, and in a public work, no matter how important it is, it happens.
I can imagine 3 or 3 stonemasons there watching and one working. I can't imagine that either.
No, but I suppose there would have been many surrounding works that were also necessary, which would not only be the construction of the Great Pyramid, so that even if they had some anticipation, which also could be that this anticipation would be delayed, because then remember what we said in the previous episode, and which is that we talked about the position of the king's chamber, the real position of the king's chamber, the position of the sepulchral chamber, which we have not found yet. Therefore, the whole assembly of the pharaoh, of all the treasures of the pharaoh that would accompany him, maybe that was done when the pharaoh died and not before, I do not know. But if that was not so, in any case, the whole arrangement of the environment had to be enormously important, because there are funerary temples, etc. Well, the fact is that we are in front of a civilization that the numbers and the precision is absolutely extraordinary. We would like to see public works. Architects were made with such precision. Well, let's see more things. Mars. Why Mars? Well, that's the big unknown, because it turns out that we now know that Mars may have ice on its ice caps. And furthermore, it may be the only planet, let's say, quote-unquote, habitable of the solar system. All the others are either gas planets or are furnaces. So what's going on? Mars was called Ares in Greek. And it turns out that the sum of the nominal values, which is 309, reduced 12 and reduced integral 3 of the word Ares, gives us 324. And guess what is? The radius of the planet Mars expressed in Iterus. 300. That's 24. And the other question is, hey, did these gentlemen knew the radius of Mars? Sure, if they were able to calculate the Syrian distance, of course, they could calculate the Mars radius of the red planet. And you used to make jokes about the foremen. Sure, as I built, I seriously considered that what could be the time, that is the volume of stone they had to move per day. As we know that the total volume is 17,979,175 cubic real cubits, because the law of 888 has confirmed it to us. And we know that the work lasted 6,216 days. We can calculate what is the volume of stone that they had to place each day, and it is 2,892 real cubits. That is to say, here we find, with the number of the mother civilization, not that of the one god, not the number of the one god, which is 888, but with the number of the mother civilization. But notice that if we now transform the number of the mother civilization, but notice that if we now transform that beautiful little number of 6,216 days, we transform it into volume in real cubic cubits. Oh, surprise, we found that it was the equivalent of 892 cubic meters. That is to say, 7 times 888 cubic cubits corresponded to a volume of 892 cubic meters. That is to say, let's see, we are faced with a system of an absolutely extraordinary complexity that give us different planes of interconnection to permanently give us the same message. We are an advanced scientific civilization. Advanced, we will see, but I can say advanced. At least with respect to what we believed until now. That is based on 2 main identifiers. the name of their god one, which is 888, won the name of that land of the primitives, which was their mother civilization, which is the 892, because the volume of the Great Pyramid, to a very close approximation, it can be calculated as the product of 892, which we have found, by 2892, which we have also found. So surprising, isn't it? Surprising, isn't it?
I am stunned. Is that all it
And I
takes is
changed.
for you to tell me that in the coronation beast? I finished it with a triple from below the pharaoh already of the surplus that went from... and the whole empire cheering and throwing the triple already there. Come on.
That would have been more difficult than
Worth 888 points.
to light the cauldron with the arrow on fire in the Olympic Games of Barcelona in 1999 and...
But of course, as they were so surplus as I threw triple, is that nothing...
2. You can imagine what it was. You can imagine what it was. Well, let's see where we go from here. Yes, more elements left over. And let's see how this fits in with the Julian
More
day,
come?
because it's as if the Julian day was based on 2 dates. The establishment of the Julian day. One, that it was 432,001. The final day of the death of Osiris, the day of the great cataclysm. I have to warn you that Julian day begins with a rather strange fact. Day 0 is the first day of January minus 4,712. That is, they start counting with a 0 day. This was probably to get an adjustment, because notice, look at this. The day of the inauguration of the Great Pyramid was Julian day 797,251. And that is nothing more than 892, 88888 newspaper raised to 4.
It is as if all the time they are always giving you the information in case you have doubts about something. So if you have doubts about something, then you have to worry about what we give you. On the other hand, we give you the information in case, because there are different ways to arrive. And there is always corroboration. It is what we said before. They do not give a stitch without thread. And they want to make sure that the information always comes well tied. But I cannot imagine a mathematical coordinate system where the information is always well tied. But I can't imagine a mathematical coordinate system where the information is always well tied. Of mathematical coordinates where that has a place, that is to say,
I can't imagine it either. I mean, that is why the big is how they did it, because what we are doing is to systematically combine data and data and data and data and data, data and data and data and data and data, as if they have different dimensional inputs. How does it all intersect? So I have said it from the very first moment. I have been able to analyze, almost crumble the information that they give me, and I'm sure that I have left some information in the... I have been designing all my life, but I would have been incapable of designing something like this because, as I said the other day, there is a magical component behind it. Again, I said it the other day, there's a magical component behind it. It's as if we were talking about the Egyptian Mecca, Egyptian magic.
The thing is that, for example, you have a certain reasonableness for what we don't understand. What doesn't fit into our scientific schemes may seem to be Arto-Shiklar, that the author of the novel, that of the previous 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 novel, that of the novel that of the novel prior to the book, it says that anything that may seem technologically advanced and we do not understand is not differentiable.
No, not at all. Imagine that your great-grandparents in the middle of the 19th century put you in front of a television screen.
A night is as it has no explanation.
Well, that's only 100-year time lag. Well, we are talking about the star channels. Up to now, it may have seemed to us very beautiful that they were pointing to the start and end date of the Great Pyramid. But beware, only serve for this, because we have only used two stellar channels, the south stellar channels and the north stellar channels. And the northern ones, what were they for? That's what I asked myself. And I came to the conclusion in my doctoral dissertation that it could be that they were pointing, something that some Egyptologists had already advanced it, towards certain stars. I was able to deduce that those main stars of Egypt were 6, that in addition there were 2 alignments of the sun and 2 alignments of the moon. So we had 10 alignments the basis of the decimal system, 8 stars, the number of Thoth, and 6 stars, the basis of the 60th system. And I asked myself, because there was a very important surprise, all the alignments were occurring years in the future of the Great Pyramid. They all pointed to the future. And the question I asked myself is, let's see, what if it turns out that we understand time as vectors, as fractions of time, as time vectors, and we add it up? Where does it lead us? Where does that take us? That's where I started to find some pretty curious things, which is now long to explain, and that's part of book 4.
A question to clarify, so that everyone also from watching us, listening, when you say they were pointing to the future,
yes,
to the future of the Great Pyramid,
to
the future Great Pyramid, but how do you distinguish that they point to a future date, or a future date, or a future date?
Because they align with the stellar channels. That is, the clearest case is the sun. Imagine that the sun sets at the end, at the tip of the star channel, and illuminates the bottom of the star channel. Therefore, this is an alignment. With the stars, it is exactly the same. Also think that the stellar channel is about 20 centimeters wide. Therefore, the ray of light from the sun, or from the light beam from the sun or the star, in the case that we could talk about the radius of light of the star, or that there is an eye underneath, in the manner of a telescope, would allow these 10 alignments. When you take the time segments of those 10 alignments and add them up, you arrive at a date of our future. And that concerned me, because we were talking about an end of the year.
Of an end of the year?
Yes. And we were talking about, without the correction of the Gregorian calendar, they would surely be showing you a one from the other. No one knows why our calendar has started on a one of the other. And notice that the Julian day of that date ends in the year of the date of the date. Well, the question was why the priests, architects, astronomers of the Great Pyramid, had to indicate us a date of the future, which also almost coincides with the end of the year of our calendar. Well then, I read what is in the book. I will not say more, because I think this is a subject that deserves a more in-depth work. I read verbatim. The answer to this question will reveal to us the greatest secret that the Great Pyramid has kept for us throughout the millennia. The announcement of the return of the bird Bennu. The announcement of the return of the phoenix bird. And let us observe that the Julian day that corresponds to this date, I insist on it, ends in the year of the years 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 of the years. We are going to have to talk about that. It is the central theme of Book 4, and we would have to delve into a monograph on it. Monograph on the subject. It is very important.
But to me, I obviously did not manage the information in the same way as the management, because you are managing it. You have been researching it for 20 years, apart from your own knowledge. But one thing that has caught my attention is that if I can interpret it and I can read it, that you have become very serious.
The subject is very serious. The subject is very serious. Look at one thing. I will ask a very simple question. If these gentlemen came from a great cataclysm, what was the cause of this great cataclysm? And the next question is, are they perhaps warning us of a future great cataclysm? We will see.
Well, we'll leave it here, because we usually end up with our spirits a little bit higher, but we will see.
The truth is what is there.
It is today. We end up a little bit so well. We will deal with it in the next one in 10. I hope you liked it. As always, if you liked the video, like it, subscribe to the channel. That would help us a lot. Follow us on social networks. And calm there is that we are going to talk about this well, and tranquility of good food, Miquel. Like, thanks to you, and thanks to all of you, and we hope in the next